Hi, I'm Jeff Peel, and this is the TNE podcast. In this conversation, I interview Aaron Day, who has been campaigning for the freedom of Roger Ver, who's currently under arrest in Spain. Roger's a well known libertarian and cryptocurrency advocate. And last week, Roger was interviewed by Tucker Carlson. So I started off by asking Aaron about that interview and about the reasons behind Roger Ver's arrest. Aaron, thanks very much indeed for making the time. I know you've been very busy recently in terms of the campaign to free Roger. So I wanted to get a little bit of your time, really following up on the interview that Roger did last week with Tucker Carlson. Obviously, it caused quite a sensation. Ironically, I was flying back from Spain when I heard about the interview and watched it or listened to it rather on the plane on the way home. It was very a slightly nuanced or a different argument that he made. Obviously, he had a limited amount of time uh, in that interview with Tucker Carlson, but perhaps you could just give us an overview of how you know Roger, how you've got involved in this campaign. Then we'll get into a little bit of nitty gritty about why it was that he was arrested. Uh, and of course, there are public reasons given as to why he was arrested. Perhaps they're not correct. But how do you know him, and how are you involved in this campaign?
So I first saw Roger talk about Bitcoin and met Roger in 2012 at a Free State Project event here in New Hampshire called Liberty Forum. And in fact, that was the very first time I've been exposed to Bitcoin. And I know there are a lot of people now that are heavily involved and even famous and influential in Bitcoin that also learned about Bitcoin from Roger at that particular event. And it's a video clip I play all the time where, and by the way, Roger's been true to the message from the very beginning. He talks about Bitcoin being something that can offer peer-to-peer digital cash for the world, separate from central banks and separate from centralized governments, and that this is something that can not only spread economic freedom, but something that can be used to stop the warfare state and endless wars all around the world, which of course are only possible because of central bank fiat currency. And so that literally got my first exposure to Bitcoin. I haven't seen Roger since then in person. I haven't actually seen him physically since 2012.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've been following him ever since and communicating with him periodically, largely not even on crypto issues, largely on political issues. So Roger's a
Mm-hmm.
voluntarist, and so that actually is my political ideology as well. And so most of my interactions with him have been even outside of the crypto sphere. When so I started heavily using Bitcoin in 2012, and then in 2019 I stopped using a personal bank account and I started using Bitcoin Cash, which is a project that Roger had started promoting. He didn't create it, which is a common misconception, but he decided to go in that direction after actually facing some censorship and propaganda during the what's called the block size wars. And so it turns out I used it because it was the only thing that was actually usable in terms of low transaction fees and availability for use for retail purchases. So there was that connection. And then I wrote my book, The Final Countdown, and identified that CBDCs are essentially the biggest threat to human liberty in a couple of years ago, and really started traveling around the country, educating people about the threats of CBDCs and also teaching them about alternatives that they can use. And it was during this time period that Roger wrote his book and released his book, Hijacking Bitcoin. And it was actually a breath of fresh air because Roger hadn't been in the public light for quite some time. He certainly remained active kind of behind the scenes. He didn't stop investing in crypto projects or pursuing digital cash, but he wasn't as vocal publicly. And so when that book came out, I was thrilled about it, frankly, because looking at the threat of CBDCs and knowing what had happened to Bitcoin, I was already familiar with what had happened in terms of the hijacking of Bitcoin, but not to the level of detail. So to me, this book coming out was really helpful for me. One, it was eye-opening to see the detail outlined in this book. There's something like 287 citations and references in this book. So it's very fact-based. And I thought,
Mm.
wow, this may really help open people's eyes. And so I interviewed Roger 3 weeks before he was arrested in Spain. And to take one brief step back, another friend of ours, so I'm part of the Free State Project, this group to get 20,000 libertarians to move to New Hampshire. And I learned about the Free State Project from a radio show called Free Talk Live that was hosted by Ian Freeman and Mark Edge. So Ian Freeman is the one who actually introduced Roger to Bitcoin. Roger learned about Bitcoin from Free Talk Live in 2010.
Wow.
Ian faced some of his own legal issues and was looking at 40 years in federal prison, basically for selling Bitcoin without having filled out the proper paperwork. So my wife and I were going to his sentencing hearing, and I actually sent a message to Roger. I said, "Hey, Roger, will you help share this to your audience?" Because he has like 750,000 followers on X, so that we can get as many people as possible to Ian's sentencing hearing. So we went. Ian was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, and then 7.5 months later, Roger was arrested in Spain. So that's pretty much the arc on this. Now, when Roger was arrested originally, I was immediately fearful, actually, for his life, because I saw what happened to Ian. And in Ian Freeman's case, they completely manufactured the charges. It was something that was clearly they put moles in his operation. It was a complete intentional setup, and the setup was designed to basically shut Ian up, because Ian was an effective advocate for this. I mean, if you are the central bank, if you're the Federal Reserve, and you guys are looking at threats to CBDCs, you want to find the people that are the most impactful at creating network effects for spreading alternative digital currencies. Well, you're going to run into Ian Freeman and you're going to run into Roger at the top of that list. So I knew when they arrested him, it was politically motivated. And I also knew that the DOJ is capable of using outright lies and manipulation. And then after I had interviewed Roger, a couple of weeks later, I interviewed a guy named Steven Nerioff. And this was alarming as well. Steven he actually is a lawyer and an inventor, and he created the legal framework for the ICO, for the initial coin offering. He also created, and he was the founding lawyer for Ethereum. And in fact, Vitalik was staying at his house in the United States. He had provided guidance on how the Ethereum Foundation could work. Throughout this process, he uncovered some behavior he didn't like between Ethereum and then the head of the SEC, and China's involved, and something. I won't go into all the details. I did a long interview with him about this. And what ended up happening was, at some point in the middle of the night, the FBI stormed his house with 12 agents, arrested him, threw him in the back of a van, showed him a list of two-page list of people that are basically at the intersection of liberty and crypto, and said, if you don't provide information that leads to indictments and arrests of multiple of these people, you'll never see your children again. So what had happened is they manufactured an extortion case against Nerioff for the purpose of leveraging him to get information about people in the Liberty crypto community without any basis for it. So in 2019, what I found right after interviewing Roger was that the DOJ had been explicitly going after and trying to find information where it didn't even exist, specifically to target people. And Roger was one of the people on that list. So I knew Roger was in trouble. And that's when I, took a big interest in trying to raise awareness about his case. Now, then I thought when he got out on bail, everything was going to be okay, because during this time period, Michael Saylor had settled a tax liability, and FTX had settled a multi-billion-dollar tax liability for pennies on the dollar. So I just assumed they were trying to extort Roger and, get him in a weak position so that they could negotiate a higher settlement. And it turns out, so as 1 month goes by, 2 months go by, 3 months goes by, I find out that they've never even told Roger how much he owes. There's never been any negotiation for a settlement. This is purely political. Yeah. And so at this point, I'm now realizing that they're basically going after the guy who is the most effective person on the planet at spreading digital cash for use as an alternative currency, and that is the primary motivation.
Yeah, because the book Hijacking Bitcoin, it got into quite an esoteric technical discussion related to how the sort of big blocker, small blocker discussion, and obviously as somebody like Roger, a big blocker, essentially arguing that that was a technical requirement in order to maintain Bitcoin's role as a transactional currency, a private transactional peer-to-peer currency. And then the small blockers increasingly moving towards the argument that by maintaining the small blocks, it meant that Bitcoin really, because it couldn't support and couldn't scale the transactional volumes, had to become a store of value. So the positioning of Bitcoin changed, but it was a very as you said, a very well-informed discussion. But obviously subsequently, about a month after the release of the book, then Roger was arrested in Spain, going about his business, attending a conference in Spain, and then arrested. And then it all came out about this DOJ action in relation to the fact that he hadn't paid apparently an appropriate level of exit taxes. Well, we assume that this is the reason. But obviously, when Tucker Carlson interviewed him, the argument in the book, which was that relatively esoteric argument, changed very much to the fact that it appeared that Roger suddenly realized that he was right in the center of this maelstrom about the maintenance of fiat currency and, of course, parallel stores of value like Bitcoin. One of the conspiracy theories, if you like, that has done the rounds was in relation to the creation of Bitcoin. It was suggested at one point that Bitcoin was created by the CIA, but of course Roger didn't articulate that view at all. He said it appeared that the intelligence service had kind of hijacked Bitcoin by, for example, taking control of certain chat groups and chat forums. And that the discussion and the role that Bitcoin was positioned as was very much one of a store of value. So it was less a discussion related to the technical architecture, if you like, or the protocol, and more the fact that the intelligence services had manipulated things. And it seemed to me that Roger accepted that actually there was active intelligence service involvement in his arrest and discrediting and potential incarceration. Is that your view as well?
It's absolutely my view. In fact, to me, it's clear as night and day, because what's going on here isn't even the normal protocol for the IRS. The normal protocol would be that you'd send somebody a letter that says, here's how much you owe in terms of penalties and interest. Like, there's nothing about this process that is part of the normal process. And I am behind the scenes, I'm trying to research actually what's going on. And it sounds like his lawyers have even issued FOIA requests and are being shot down, being the ability to get information about what's even going on with the nature of this process. And it is beyond clear, not only from Roger's book. My book actually picks up where Roger's book takes off, or where it ends, which is that he talks about this guy, John Dillon, who he shows the quotes in that, I think, the correspondence back and forth, who is a mysterious character who claimed he was from the intelligence agency. And this guy spent tens of thousands of dollars promoting the idea that early on that Bitcoin wasn't a currency and should be a store of value. And then he actually funded the development of what's called replace by fee. And I won't go into all the details. The simplest way that I can describe it is they created a cap and trade system, just like with carbon. So they decided to keep the blocks small and then create a market to drive up the transaction fees. It's very much a technocratic position. Well, this guy, John Dillon, was the guy that funded the trade component of it, funded this replace by fee component of it. So you have somebody who was a self-confessed member of the intelligence community previously putting out propaganda against Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, and then now funding some of the changes to the protocol and solidifying, making it a store of value. And so, but that's only one aspect of it. What you find is that the same people that funded this narrative shift to digital gold also funded all 3 US CBDC pilots. So for a long period of time,
Yeah.
the Bitcoin Foundation had been funding the developers. The Bitcoin Foundation had some internal problems, and then MIT came in under the leadership of Joi Ito and solidified Lightning Network and SegWit, and then also funded all 3 US CBDC pilots. So now they've made Bitcoin, they've capped and throttled Bitcoin at 7 transactions per second, and then they've gone on to simultaneously build something that does 1.8 million transactions per second. And you know what? Their PSYOP has worked beautifully, because now you have Michael Saylor out there saying Bitcoin isn't about competing with the dollar or the euro or Visa or MasterCard. It's about complying with your taxes, know your customer. And now he's even saying it isn't even about self-custody. And people are celebrating when the chair of the Federal Reserve and the head of the Treasury comes out and says, yeah, Bitcoin isn't a threat to the dollar, but it's digital gold. And now people are celebrating this digital gold narrative. Frankly, and again, you look at the title of the white paper, this was clearly supposed to be digital cash. It was supposed to be something that competed with Visa, MasterCard, and fiat currencies. And the hijacking has been completed with respect to this particular blockchain.
Yeah, because it seems too that the establishment, if you like, has totally embraced the idea of digital gold, store of value, because the administration obviously is pushing cryptocurrency per se in the shape of dollar stable coins. Howard Lutnick obviously involved in Tether, and others, within the new administration, actively pushing cryptocurrency, and at the same time, it being suggested that, if you like, the Michael Saylor and the core Bitcoin network is essentially creating a new Fed, a gold reserve in Bitcoin. So it's looking increasingly like we're moving to a world where Bitcoin is going to be the definitive digital store of value, but not a transactional currency. And of course, with ETFs and so on, and being endorsed by people like BlackRock, it appears that the establishment seems very comfortable with this store of value argument, and very uncomfortable with the suggestion that Bitcoin should get back to its roots and become a transactional currency.
Well, actually, it's worse than that. This is designed to fail. So Bitcoin is slow, expensive, non-fungible, trackable digital gold. It's not even good digital gold. So the truth of the matter is that, as we now know, Bitcoin can be tracked. Obviously, Roger, Ross Ulbricht, and others have known, but we have the CIA and others using chain analysis. This is now out in the open. They're tracking everybody's transactions. Now the IRS is requiring you to report your self-custody transactions. All of the exchanges are reporting information to the IRS. So they're building a map of everybody's Bitcoin. Well, if they decide one day they don't like your Bitcoin, or they don't only want these Bitcoin, then some are on a white list, some are on a black list, which means Bitcoin is no longer fungible. So it's non-fungible digital gold. I believe that this entire thing is being done as a diversion for people to not put their money in alternatives to CBDCs and to fiat currency. I actually think Bitcoin is going to crash. My best case, and of course there are a multitude of different scenarios here, but Tether has its own issues, their own inability to pass audits. They've created essentially their own Federal Reserve, and that's been part of what's been pumping up the price of Bitcoin. And I think there's going to be a controlled demolition of Tether. And when that collapses, it's going to take Bitcoin down with it. And then that's going to give the power, that's going to give the pretense for the government to come in and say, hey, see, these decentralized things don't work. These private things don't work. You now need JP Morgan coin. You now need a CBDC. That, or alternatively, Tether will end up being acquired by JP Morgan and will become a de facto CBDC. and we'll just keep the fiat Ponzi going a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, there's nothing in the white paper that suggests that having Bitcoin, or excuse me, BlackRock and Fidelity and third parties selling shares in something that they don't even have the physical possession. People are 2 layers removed from Bitcoin. This is so far a diversion from the white paper that it's actually absurd at this point. So of course the institutions support this. The institutions see Bitcoin as a threat. If Bitcoin and tokenization is done privately outside of the existing system, you don't need these third parties, any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think that there's a slight problem here? And obviously, your focus at the minute is in terms of, the campaign of getting Roger freed. Can you tell us a little bit more for those people who don't know the full background of the story? He's currently under house arrest. I think he's out on bail, but he's essentially under house arrest in Mallorca. Mind you, there are worse places to be under house arrest. But he's in Mallorca in Spain, obviously in the Spanish jurisdiction, on bail. But I think he has to report daily or whatever in terms of his whereabouts. He can't obviously leave the jurisdiction of Spain. There's an active extradition warrant out for him. But I think seems to be making certain breakthroughs in terms of the fact that he did get out on bail, for example. But can you explain a little bit of the background in terms of this exit tax ruse that they're using in terms of holding him and seeking extradition?
Well, let's put some things in perspective. So there's the fact that Roger had just released Hijacking Bitcoin, which is one part of this. Something that people don't know is that Roger was just about to start going public in promoting a privacy coin called Zano, Z-A-N-O. And in fact, he told me about this on my podcast and then reached out to me after he had gotten out on bail. And, so when Roger says, hey, look, this is really important because he knows that I'm looking for solutions to CBDCs. And so I've spent, now 6 months and know the team and everything else. He was in Spain and was going to be speaking at or attending a privacy coin conference. And he had just, I believe, 3 days before he was arrested, spoken in the UAE about privacy tokens. And I shared that clip last week. And so there's kind of he was doing a 1-2 punch of exposing the hijacking of Bitcoin while also proposing an alternative. And people have to realize that Roger is not just about this whole Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash. He's invested in over 40 companies that you can see on his website, and that's actually only scratches the surface. I know of, and I'm not going to state here what they are, but he's invested in multiple privacy coins. He's been the first investor in numerous cryptocurrencies. He's the co-founder of XRP. So if you look at this, the number 1 and number 3 cryptocurrencies by market cap, Roger was Bitcoin Jesus for Bitcoin, and he's the co-founder of the number 3 coin. And if people understood what his investments were in helping to fund and found other cryptocurrencies, it's mind-boggling. That's why he's a threat, because if he decided to put his efforts around not just saying, hey, Bitcoin is bad, but by the way, here's an alternative, and here's an alternative that isn't on a public ledger that the CIA can track. That's bad news, because that's a real threat. So I think it's the 1-2 punch. And then consider that it's in Spain, where Roger's friend John McAfee died in prison. He was thrown into the same prison McAfee died in. And by way of timeline, McAfee was in that prison for 8 months fighting extradition. And he lost his final appeal to the Supreme Court after 8 months, and then ended up dead 24 hours later. Roger's been in Spain for 7 months. So while at least he's out on bail, he does have to check in every other day. And I guess the process is that he either get a letter that says, hey, you've defeated this extradition, you're free, or they'll just arrest him with no advance notice. So, imagine what living under those circumstances is like when you're in a country, you're away from home, and you don't even speak the language, and you don't know if today is going to be the last day that you have freedom, literally for the rest of your life. This exit tax thing it's absurd when you dig into it. And Roger's legal team last week or the week before released their motion. They filed a motion to dismiss, and they've actually released the emails back and forth that show that Roger, well, he did pay an exit tax, but it also shows the email correspondence that he was trying to comply with and going to above and beyond to dot all the I's and cross all the T's to make sure that he paid the right amount. And those emails show this. So all of this has been made available for the public. So they're going after him for stuff from 2014 and 2017. And what they're saying is when he left, he didn't pay enough of an exit tax, but they're not going to tell him how much. So after all these 7 months and or 10 years, however you want to look at it, they still haven't said how much he owes. But when you look back at 2014, nobody knew how to pay their taxes for Bitcoin. The IRS didn't have clear guidance on this. We didn't know, was it a currency? Was it an asset? And also, at that time, the Mt. Gox exchange, which was by far the largest exchange, had just collapsed. So there was no liquidity. So this whole argument is when you pay your exit tax, you basically have to pay whatever it is, 25% of your net worth. It's kind of like an unrealized capital gains. Well, if Roger were to have sold all of his Bitcoin on that day when he left, based on the fact that Mt. Gox was gone, the price would have dropped to zero. I mean, I would argue they probably owe him a massive refund because based on the valuation methods for this, I mean, how do you estimate what the price is when what you would be selling in one day is greater than the entire volume for the entire market for a day? So this is how absurd this is. And then the IRS went in with guns and raided his lawyer's office, stole his communications, which is a violation of attorney-client privilege. And then, are attempting to use that information against him, even though all the information shows is that Roger was actually trying to comply with paying his taxes. And so the more you learn about this case, the more absurd it is, and the more you realize that it's one, political in nature, and two, it's designed to have a chilling effect on Roger and his effectiveness at both exposing Bitcoin and also introducing the marketplace to alternatives.
Yeah, obviously we're in a position at the minute where there's a Trump transition team being assembled, and many of the senior appointments have been made. He's under house arrest under the existing Biden administration. But of course, the Trump administration is very much associated with this sort of establishment crypto movement. I mentioned Scott or Lutnick earlier, and Scott Bessent, and there are many others in the new administration who may not look favorably on Roger's position. How hopeful are you that that Trump will pardon him if he's still incarcerated in Spain when he comes into office?
I mean, this is the challenge with this, but we're talking to a lot of people. There are a lot of people working on this. There are people all over the world, friends of Roger, that are working on this initiative. And so a lot of it's education and just getting to the right people. I think the fact that Roger was on Tucker, Trump watches Tucker Carlson. So I think that obviously Trump is surrounded by people that don't hold Roger's position because no one's heard Roger's position because it's been suppressed and he didn't even have the opportunity to get it out. But I will tell you, I've been going around the country. My wife and I do these workshops, and we've been to 24 states, and now we're actually starting to go outside of the country. And I have a segment in my presentation where I talk about hijacking Bitcoin, and I show this clip of Roger versus a clip of Michael Saylor. And everybody comes up to me afterwards. They're less interested about CBDCs and more interested in, hey, wait, what did you say about Bitcoin? And wait, Michael Saylor is saying what? And so the truth is people don't know about what Roger's saying, but when they do learn about it, I mean, I can tell you just recently, somebody that had multiple people that had been Bitcoin maxis, but maybe hadn't been following it recently, decided to sell all their Bitcoin after learning about this hijacking Bitcoin book and the whole narrative, because they just stopped paying attention to it after a while and didn't realize what the new narrative is. And so that is the challenge. And I think the bigger positioning on this, here's the irony. If Roger loses, the biggest losers are Bitcoin maxis. They're going after Roger's Bitcoin. So if you're a Bitcoin maxi and you are in early and they win with this precedent, the probability that they paid enough taxes, that anyone else paid enough taxes is almost zero, because Roger literally hired the best lawyers and the best valuation experts to figure out this exit tax. I think I saw something somewhere that most people just didn't pay tax during this time period, and then Coinbase has then gone back and like retroactively issued like 90,000 different notifications that, hey, you guys need to pay this tax. I think Roger suffers from being the only guy that actually paid his tax during this time period. So it's Bitcoin maxis themselves that are going to be out of their own self-interest be rooting for Roger. So it's almost bizarre to me to see people, you can like Roger or not like Roger, but you're acting out of your own against your own self-interest if you are rooting for the IRS to win in this situation.
Absolutely. And of course, the point he made on Tucker Carlson was that, by leaving the United States, obviously becoming a citizen of St. Kitts, saying that by leaving the United States, he was sticking true to his word in that he was a committed libertarian, and in fighting the system, he was fighting the government in terms of imposing these ridiculous strictures. So he clearly is someone who is very ideologically motivated and very, very passionate about this, because it can't be in his interests to potentially undermine the value of Bitcoin when he holds so much of it.
Well, I mean, this has always been the case. Roger had money before he got into Bitcoin. This has always been ideological. And when you see the video clip that I show from 2012 versus what he said on Tucker Carlson, it hasn't deviated one bit in 12 years. He didn't need any of this hassle. He didn't have, if he wanted to just maximize his fiat gains, he could have not chosen to go with the BCH fork and then all of the other investments that he's made along the way. So this is not about maximizing his fiat at all. It has never been about maximizing his fiat. And people that are willing to stick to their principles and hold to their ideology are very dangerous to the establishment. And frankly, there aren't many people like it. It's one of the reasons. It's the main reason that I support Roger so much on this. It's because I agree with his ideology, but I also profoundly respect how consistent he's been and how impactful he's been on this, because it's really important stuff. When Bitcoin was launched, this was right after the 2008 collapse. And so at that point, people were, understandably concerned about central banking and the bailouts of the banks and how fiat currency is working. We're now facing CBDCs. So whereas adopting Bitcoin might have been a nice to have in 2010, it is now absolutely necessary, because the alternative is literally all of our money is programmed, all of it's tracked, debanking becomes the rule, and everything is tied to a social credit system. So what Roger's promoting now is more important than ever. And so yeah, he's working against his own, I guess, short-term maximizing fiat issue, but he's not working against his interests if his long-term goal is maximizing economic freedom and minimizing state violence around the world. And that's always been what his motivations are. And I applaud him for it.
And what do you think Michael Saylor's motivations are? Because it can't possibly be about, just simply collecting more and more money. Or is it, and also, Whitney Webb, for example, has suggested that Saylor and the core Bitcoin network is tainted to a degree, in that they clearly are working in league with some of the intelligence agencies. What's Saylor's and the core Bitcoin network's role in all of this?
Well, why would we think that Saylor's motivations are anything other than maximizing fiat? There's nothing about his history that suggests anything ideological. I mean, he originally came out against Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden had a change of heart. This is a guy that I believe his office is 5 minutes from Langley. He's been a contractor to the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. He magically gets to resolve his tax issues, while Roger gets to be uniquely the only person that not only isn't given the ability to settle, but is facing who faces 109 years in federal prison for taxes. So, so I don't know exactly what's going on, but I mean, what is Saylor doing? He's using other people's money to pump up the price of Bitcoin. I mean, this is a guy that lost. I remember Saylor from when I started my first company in the mid '90s. He lost more money in a single day than any human being alive at that point. He lost $6 billion in one day. This is not a guy with necessarily a great track record, but look, he could be right out of central casting, because as far as I'm concerned, he's distorted the narrative 180 degrees. What he says, look, I mean, maybe he got into trouble and they offered him a deal, and the deal was he doesn't go to jail if he pushes this narrative. I have no idea. That's purely speculation, but I can't imagine. I'm not seeing an ideological narrative at all. I'm not even seeing him try to act like there's an ideological narrative. I've just seen him push the goalpost to now all of a sudden, well, it's digital gold, but we've basically ripped off and destroyed the essence of Bitcoin. And I mean, and we could go through too this idea that the dollar is not going to be backed by Bitcoin any more than it's backed by gold.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like some of these fanciful ideas that people have, you could even back a currency by Bitcoin, but the tokens that you create that are backed by Bitcoin are not transparent. And so the state can mess with the backing by Bitcoin just like they do gold, or abandon it altogether. Like that's not really a solution, even if you think through how they're even trying to play that out. And let's not forget, the US government has 200,000 Bitcoin that they obtained through theft, through civil asset forfeiture. This whole idea of a lot of the ideas about censorship resistance and everything else, again, Bitcoin can be tracked. And so while, yes, you have to give up your private key, if somebody's coming to you and saying, hey, look, the CIA tracked this, we know it's you, you can either spend the rest of your life in prison or hold on to your private keys, what do you think people are going to do? It's lost any of the actual usefulness from a censorship resistance perspective now that we have the tracking. So I believe he's probably, because he's not a stupid guy, I'm guessing that he's probably in on this. He's in on the hijacking narrative, and I don't know what the motivations are, whether he's doing it out of greed or whether he's doing it out of fear, but he's clearly not interested in providing alternatives to CBDCs or anything that's actually going to improve human freedom around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So final point, really, or final question, people like myself, we're sort of, I read the book when it came out, Hijacking Bitcoin. I would highly recommend it. Ironically, it was Jeffrey Tucker who tweeted about the book, and on the back of that, I bought it very quickly and read it during the summer, and was astonished when I heard about Roger's arrest and subsequent house arrest. What can people do, practically to make this situation more well known and also register their outrage?
Well, the best thing to do is go to the freerogernow.org that I've got, above my head. Go there, and there's an open letter that you can sign. These things really matter. So, I know Ross Ulbricht's mother, Lynn Ulbricht, and if you've been following that at all, President Trump has agreed to commute Ross Ulbricht's sentence, and he was looking at he was serving 2 life sentences plus 40 years for operating the Silk Road, which was an online marketplace that it did happen to sell drugs, but it was based very much on libertarian principles, and his case was an absolute disaster in terms of the legal process and everything else. And it turns out, by the way, Roger's the largest funder of Ross Ulbricht's legal defense. There's so much more we could even talk about, and I hope there's a documentary someday about all of the causes that Roger has supported that are pro-liberty, that have nothing, that are outside of crypto. So it matters to sign that open letter, because those signatures that Lynn Ulbricht got for Ross, that's part of what the motivation was and what convinced Trump that there was true popular support. So that matters. Share it with friends and family. Share it directly as well as on social media, but also share the interviews that come out about this. Share this interview. Share the Tucker Carlson interview. There's going to be a lot more. There's a lot scheduled and a lot coming up over the next month, as we approach the inauguration. So just get this word out, because Roger has been censored. He truly has been. Part of how I know he's been censored is I wrote a really short review of the book. I mean, really short. I mean, it's as short as, hey, I just read this, you really should read this book. And then Roger retweeted it. And then all of a sudden, I was put on a block list by Michael Saylor, by Max Kaiser, by all of the Bitcoin core developers, some people that I've never even spoken to before. They literally create a list, these BTC maxis of people, and they preemptively put people on block lists. So when Roger says there's censorship and propaganda, and then I see other people say, oh, he's making this up, I'm telling you directly, I've lived it. And if you want to find out yourself, then take Hijacking Bitcoin, take a link to Hijacking Bitcoin, or take the freerogernow.org link and go to any of the Bitcoin core developers or Michael Saylor's page on social media and ask him to sign it and see what happens. See how quickly you get blocked. This is a very organized campaign. And by the way, the biggest censorship and propaganda campaign of all is arresting the guy and throwing him in a prison where his friend died, and essentially putting him in a position where he has a gag order right after he's released a book during a presidential election season. Anyway, it was the ultimate in censorship. So what I have found is when people learn about this case, when they go to freerogernow.org and learn about the case and see the timeline, and when they read the book, the overwhelming majority of people find it compelling and join the cause. So everybody can do that, and I highly recommend that everybody do that.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed for this. It's really appreciated, and all I can say is that I hope that we get lots more people focusing on this, and that Roger gets released as soon as possible. But thanks very much indeed for making the time. And I'll get this interview out very shortly. And yes, I do encourage people to go to the link, which is visible here, and I'll put it on the post as well. And hopefully we get Roger out and campaigning again for libertarianism and private transactional currencies, peer-to-peer currencies. So thank you very much indeed for giving me the time today.
Thank you for having me.